Michal, Bardavid, we're in Istanbul, Turkey right now. We're following the major elections, the historic elections that are taking place in Turkey. We're following the parliamentary elections and presidential elections that are taking place on the same day here in Turkey. We're in Istanbul, in the heart of Istanbul. And I'm going to be talking to Oguz Demir, an economist and EU expert. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So we're going to be discussing everything there is to know about the elections. We're going to talk about why it's important, the different issues that are on the agenda of Turkey. We're going to be talking about why this voting is taking place now, because it's taking place a lot earlier than planned. We're going to be talking about major issues of the economy that Turkey is facing. So I'm going to be talking to my expert who is going to answer all our questions and give us some insight about the election. So let's start by talking about why this election is taking place right now. It's early right now.
Yeah, of course, because after the constitutional referendum last year in 2017, it was decided to complete the elections in 2019 November. But due to the changing conjuncture in the country, both economic and political, one of the political leaders, the nationalist one, Mr. Bahçeli, claimed that the elections should be earlier. And then the ruling party's leader, President Erdogan, decided in the same manner. So they decided to make these snap elections in June 2018, which is today. So this is the visible way, this is the visible story. What we have seen that they checked the conjuncture and they saw that they're losing some of their votes, popularity in the society. And then at the end, with the claim of the MHP's leader, Mr. Bahçeli, they decided to make these elections earlier than expected, more than 1.5 years.
That is a lot of time to go faster. Now, let's talk about what the elections are about. We have parliamentary elections, but also presidential elections. Can you tell us what they are voting? What are Turkish people voting for right now?
Yeah, in 2017, the referendum, we decided to make a constitutional change in the country. And the previous system was focused on the parliamentary system, which we were electing the parliament, and the parliament was making the decisions about the government. But now we have a new system, which is the president is different from the parliament. So we're now deciding who will be in the parliament and who will be running the country. So both the legislation and the administrations were separated from each other, and now we're making decisions about selecting or voting for the president and voting for the parliamentary majority or parliamentary parties.
So two major topics. First of all, let's talk about the presidential system. So if Turkey does make this transition to a presidential system from the previous one, from a parliamentarian system, what are going to be the major changes in terms of the system and the powers?
Yeah, it seems that when you look to the change in the constitution last year, it seems that now the president will be able to pick all the cabinet. And these cabinet members will not be from the parliament, so they will be all working independently from the legislation. So, and on the other hand, the main criticism about this new system, about the judiciary system, about the parliamentary structure. So both the judiciary system and the other government institutions will be picked by the president itself. So that's a criticism, that we're going to a single man administration. But on the other hand, there is one more thing, a pro of the system, a positive thing in the system. When you compare with the previous one, everything was going on in the parliament, so any parties who's getting the majority in the parliament will be running all administrative system and the parliamentary system, legislative system. But now the president will be doing with presidential decrees, all decision-making process will be on the president and in his cabinet. But on the other hand, if there will be no majority in the parliament with the same party of the president, so there will be a discussion, conflict in each decisions made by the parliament. This is one thing, is a good thing on separation of the powers, but on the other hand, this could bring a chaos when the administration, or even in a small decision, there will be a conflict between the parliament and the presidential approach, so that could block the system when it comes on the table. So that's major thing. But on the other hand, considering the circumstances, the current circumstances in the country, the president is too powerful, both in the parliament, both in the presidential election. So then the system will go to a single leader system, which will be going back from the current democratic standards in the country.
And for example, the role of the prime minister will be abolished. He will also be able to appoint ministers, I believe.
From now on, we don't have prime minister anymore. You know.
Other ministers in the
Yeah, but they will be all picked. They will be all selected by the president. So
That's what I mean.
yeah, the president will make the decision when he's assigning them, when he's resigning them. So you know that's we're voting for a man who will be able to do whatever he wants in terms of cabinet assignments. So that's one thing that we need to. You know, that was the topic of the debate for the last year, and I think that's one of the things that we came these snap elections, because the system was not understood exactly, and there was criticism about the president that he's changing to a country to a single man system.
So basically, it seems that most of the criticism for the presidential system from opposition parties was basically that it was going to turn the country into a one-man rule.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because when they're campaigning, Turkish President Erdogan emphasized that it is time, we need this, it's time for the transition for a presidential system. But what are the other candidates saying? First of all, let's talk about who the other candidates are, because they're the ones who are saying, no, we don't want a one-man rule, we want to reverse this decision, we want to go back to a parliamentarian system, and that's what they've been promising they'll do if they are elected. So let's get to know the other candidates. Who is the main rival of President Erdogan?
Yeah, I think this election is an election of coalitions. In one side, President Erdogan and some nationalist parties who are supporting this system, the presidential system. But on the other hand, there are four more candidates who are not exactly in coalition, but in terms of their will for the country for the next year is that going back from the presidential system to the parliamentary system. The main rival, Muharrem İnce, who was supported by the Republican Party, and the other one is Selahattin Demirtas, who is getting the support of the Kurdish people living in the country, and the other one is Temel Karamollaoğlu and Meral Akşener, which they are getting some conservatives, the support of the conservatives in the country. And both these five people are claiming that they want a system, an improved parliamentary system, which is not giving all administrative powers to one man. So they're telling to the people that we need to come back to our system, which is parliamentary based system. But when we look to this scene, we can see that Muharrem İnce, Mr. İnce, who got the support of the Republicans, he ran a good campaign period, and we can see in the meetings, during the field work, that he got a sympathy from most of the people, and we can say that he consolidated the power or the most of the support from the non-presidential supporting people. Let's say this way.
Yes, it seems one of the.
Yeah.
This is one of the main.
Surprise of Istanbul.
One of the surprise of Istanbul, and one of the symbols of Istanbul actually is basically the ferry boats that go from behind the Bosphorus. We are right now in the central part of the city, where the Bosphorus is right behind us. This is where East connects with West, and this is the famous Bosphorus, and that's why we have a major, huge, gigantic ferry that has come right behind us right now.
That is what connects East to West, right?
That is exactly what connects East to West. That's what the noise was all about. But going back to what we were discussing, and the main candidate of the Republican People's Party, Muharrem İnce, as you said, he managed to energize the opposition, and this is something that the opposition has not been able to do for a very long time. Yes, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the group, has managed to get some support, but during the last 2 months, the way that we've seen a lot more energy in the people who are supporting İnce has actually been very different. What is he claiming? How come he's getting so much more support?
I think first the thing is his style is different from the previous leaders of the opposition. He was very active. He was mobilizing the people. He was talking very passionate, and this passion first energized the people. They felt that now there's a leader that they can trust. And the second thing, I think that's very important, that attracted the people to his way, was he was talking about very modern issues that we need to discuss for a while: technology, innovation, changing economy. And we were in the middle of it, let's say, economic turbulence since the beginning of the year. And these kind of sayings, or this kind of approach, I think, attracted most of the modern people who would like to see Turkey as a part of West, as a part of competition in the global market. So he was promising the people what we need to go further. So that attracted people more to his way. In the past, the other guys were also talking about these things, but his style merged with his promises, and people were attracted to this kind of approach. He was very active. He did, I think, as far as I remember, he did like 108 meetings all over Turkey in this 40-50 days. So it was a run, it was a rush, but he did a lot, and this energy also attracted people, and he became more popular than he was.
And what stuck with me was the way that he begun each of his rallies with the statement, with his motto, saying that he would be the leader of all of Turkey, that he wanted to represent both the Kurds, the Turks, the Alevis, the Sunnis, the women and the men. And I think it seemed like this is something that's missing in Turkey right now. We feel like the Turkish society is very polarized, and it seems that it's really time for people to unite and to come together and to have an atmosphere of solidarity. What's your opinion?
In the last two years, since the July 2016 coup attempt, we couldn't manage that. There are several political groups, political beliefs, and the government decided to polarize the country, behind its ideas. So, and that made people who are opposite of this idea out of the government, out of the many problems, and as you said, it was very polarized in these 2 years, and this is not only disturbing for the for the opposition groups, but also for the ruling groups. And this kind of saying by Muharrem İnce, the Republican candidate, I think that's also made sense for the people. The people will start thinking about how polarized the country, how they hate each other. So they want to come back from this idea, because Turkey, since the beginning of the republic, we got used to live together with Kurds, Turks, different religious groups, different ethnicities. But now, we're feeling that the separation or the distinction between those groups are really in the highest level. So a person who is promising to the people that we're going to live together, we're going to be together, I think that's also a missing point for the people. They missed this kind of politics, so they started to support this kind of, but we cannot still say that he's going to win, or the election is still on the table, it's still continuing, and Mr. Erdogan, the president of the country, is still the most strongest candidate in this election.
Yes, so we'll talk about what the polls are saying. This is just a little bit to give the introduction of the other candidates, and I think just to give the viewers a little bit of idea of the Turkish culture, because we're hearing, when they see the news, it's all about polarized Turkey, it's all about the split Turkey. There's so much anger in the society. However, when you come to Turkey, when you witness Turkey, when you see the people, when you talk to the people, everyone is so, the hospitality is something that's so critical for the Turkish culture. So it's very different from what we're used to right now.
Yeah, this distinction, or the separation, or these kind of problems are in political level, not in the social level. Yeah. People are still living together, people are trying to be nice, kind to each other, but in the political level, the debate is tough. Yeah. But it's on the other hand normal, because in election times it always happens in this kind of countries. Right. But we need to think that since the 2008, the economic problems are deepened in the country. We're deepened. People, for example, one thing, in the beginning of the year, we started the US dollar, Turkish lira exchange rate like 350, 360. Now it's 460. 30% down, 30% depreciated Turkish lira. So, and this really affects the life. The life is now more expensive. The inflation rate came to like 12%. On the other hand, the prices are rising, the inflation rising, and people started to feel that things are not as it was like 5 years ago, and this social well-being started to be distorted by the economic distortion, because it started to be worse since the beginning of 2018. So we can say that this election is not only an election of polarized Turkey, but also the response of people to the change in the economy.
Yeah. I'm actually going to ask you a little bit more about the economy just in a short while. Going back to the second main candidate, we said Muharrem İnce, but then we have Meral Akşener, who's also a very surprising candidate. She's the only woman candidate in the race. She's a very strong leader. What do you think her impact has been in this election?
In the beginning, she was, she was the main opposition leader till İnce came to the field. But then, and she was attracting more people from the Republican Party, from the Conservative Party, from the Nationalist Party. But then, the Ince's proactive campaign started to turn back the votes, opposition votes, in his campaign. But Akşener is still an important figure in the country, especially for the conservative people, for the nationalist people, because she's representing for those people who are not supporting the President Erdogan. So she's putting a color to the election in this, with her attitude. But the main problem about her, the national media didn't give enough place to her campaign. When to be honest, when I looked at the news shows in the evening, in the mainstream channels, I couldn't see her face as she deserved. So that's the main problem she experienced during this. But she ran a great campaign in the areas where Erdogan seemed, very strong. So she also put another way to the election. So she was, and also her attitude in the beginning of the election that she didn't accept a former President Gül not to be the running candidate against Erdogan was one of the main turning points of the elections that we can say.
Yes, I think that was very critical because just to give them an idea, one of the main processes in the beginning when they declared the snap elections was who the candidate of the main opposition was going to be. So in that point, when each of the parties decided that they would run with their own candidate, it was a very important part to bring us here to this moment. And Meral Akşener, as you said, was one of the key players in that. She decided that she would definitely be running herself, even if she was not going to be the winner. She wanted to be definitely a main candidate
That was a brave move. That was a brave move, and she did these things. Even she had no money, no support, no government support, no funding, but she believed herself and she believed her supporters that she could manage this process. And to be honest, so far she did a good job. But I'm not, after İnce's move, Muharrem İnce's move, the Republican candidate's move, I believe that most of the people who were considering to vote for Mr. Akşener, they came back to İnce because, as I said in the beginning, he managed a very successful campaign during this process. He did a good job.
And one other key player, although his votes may not be as high, he is running a campaign from prison. He's the Kurdish leader of the HDP, Selahattin Demirtas. What can you tell us about him?
That was a big disadvantage for him, to be in the prison, and it was not an easy campaign for him.
And why is he in prison?
Yeah, he's in prison because of last year. After the constitutional referendum, we made a period that the parliamentary members' immunity were over for a while, and he was blamed for some kind of Kurdish-Turkish conflicts experienced in the last year. So he was in the prison because the process, the court trial process were on the way, but the court decided to keep him in the jail. Well, it's still a debate in the country, both for the presidential, candidates, that he should be out. He should have been out during the campaign process. But even those challenges, he managed the social media very well, and the Kurdish people supported him. And I know that there are some Turkish people living in the western parts of the country were supporting him. He was one of the prominent figures in the previous presidential election. Got like 11%. Even he wasn't expected so much. So in this campaign, I think that İnce's popularity also exceeded his popularity because he was in the jail, but Ince also managed a good campaign during this process, and most of the Kurdish people I know that were considering to vote for Ince instead of Demirtas. Even they support Demirtas, they believe that this campaign process was not, as expected because he was in the jail. So the Kurdish votes are also, I think, shifting towards Ince because they know that for the second round, if nobody gets 50% plus one, there will be a second round. And in the second round, most of the people would like Ince to be as powerful, more powerful in the first round.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very significant. Now, as you mentioned, the potential runoff election would be between the top two rivals, which is expected to be Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and Muharrem İnce of the CHP. And this would take place on July 8th. So if that happens, we're going to be following these elections as well. And it's also important to note that the opposition groups have all vowed, not of course the MHP, who is in coalition with the AK Party, but the opposition from the CHP, from the HDP, from the SP, but also from, of course, the Meral Akşener's E Party. They've all decided to support whoever is going to be running against Erdogan. How significant do you think that would be?
I think this is, they in terms of before the first round, they all mentioned that for the second round they're gonna come together. But I think, it's not easy to say that this is going to happen before we solve the first round results.
Okay.
So, of course, when you look to the balance of the votes, it seems that these all opposition groups constitutes like 55 to 60% votes. And Erdogan is, 40 to 45 or sometimes towards 50%. So, this is a very close competition, and if they can come together for the second round, then there could be a chance that they can win. That's the only way that they can win. It seems that way. I'm not sure if it's gonna be enough, but that's the only strategy that they can make to win the elections in the second round. So this is very important for them, but there are some, of course, challenges to compose such a coalition. Because one side, nationalistic E Party, one side, the Kurdish group representation, the other side, a very conservative party, Saadet Party. We didn't talk about it too much, but they also have an impact on the society. Even they will not be able to get too many votes. They made an impact on the society because they're very religious and conservative group in Turkey. So they're like it's not very easy in a normal stance to bring them together. Yeah. But if you ask me, are we in the we are in the normal circumstances? To be honest, no, we're not. So it's possible, and it's the only way for the opposition to take the ruling position in the country.
And even though it's not clear what the result will be tomorrow, by tomorrow we'll know the results hopefully, but most of the polls are indicating that at least we will go to a second round. We've talked to several polling companies, and it seems that most of them believe that there will be a second round, and that's of course going to be very significant. We would have a very strong campaign. Yeah. It would be a very big challenge for Erdogan running for the first time, and it would create a lot of energy in Turkey for sure in terms of campaigning. So let's talk a little bit about the other election that we're talking about, the parliamentarian election. Tell us about the coalitions that have been formed and what these mean. Why have they decided to make coalitions, for example?
I think the coalitions are mostly, this is a new thing for Turkey. Before that, every party individually went to the elections, but this time, after the constitutional change, this time the constitution gave the parties to come together to build coalitions. And AK Party and Nationalistic Movement Party, MHP, they came together and they created a coalition. The HDP will be individually in the election, and the other parties, Saadet Party, Republican Party, and the E Party, created a coalition. The coalition will give these parties to overcome the 10% election limit. Because if any party individually gets less than 10%, there will be no parliamentary representation. So with this coalition, especially for the opposition groups, they had the chance to overcome this 10% limit. For the government side, they, I think, after the snap elections decision, there was a huge debate about the nationalistic party to be able to overcome this 10%. So the ruling party made a coalition with the nationalistic party to put them over 10% limit. So that's one side. That's one logic for the ruling party. The rest come together to go over 10% together. So this way, the representation in the parliament will be better to be, if you ask me, because in the past, because all parties were going to the election individually, and most of those parties were under 10%, so they would have no, they couldn't get any representation in the parliament. But this way, the parliament will have a better representation in the country. E party, nationalistic party, Saadet party, they will be all in the parliament and they will represent their voters. So that's an improvement when you compare with the previous system. But this is also a disadvantage for the ruling party, because in the past they were getting 40%, 45% of the votes, but they were getting a high majority in the parliament. This time, because there will be no 10% limit, everybody will have their own representation. So it seems that when we will look to the polls, it seems that the majority of the parliament will also be lost by the ruling party now. So that's the one thing that all people in the streets were talking about. If the Justice and Development Party, Erdogan's party, will keep the majority of the parliament. But the early polls shows that it's not going to happen. And that's also a leverage for the opposition after the presidential elections. Even Erdogan will win or not, if he wins, and if he couldn't be able to get the majority in the parliament, then there will be a balanced system in the country, which seems better when you compare with the previous structure.
And when you said having a majority or having a representation in the parliament, so one group is also very significant there. You mentioned that the HDP, they're not part of any coalition, so that group does still need to get at least 10% to pass the 10% threshold in order to be represented in the parliament. And there was a statement made by the leader, Selahattin Demirtas, and he was saying that if the Turkish democracy, if the Kurds are not represented in the parliament, if they do not pass the 10% threshold, the Turkish democracy would be the one that would be suffering a major blow. So he's basically trying to emphasize that the Kurds really need representation in Turkey, because they do hold a large percent of the population as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. And let's talk a little bit about what you were coming to a little bit before, which is the economy. And because that is a key issue in Turkey, I believe, right now. As you mentioned, the Turkish lira is tumbling. It's lost a lot of value this year. How significant or how critical is the economy when we're considering elections?
Yeah. Before that, maybe I need to comment on these Demirtas sayings. Kurds are not homogeneous. They're not only voting to one party, but the majority of the Kurds, like 70-80% of the Kurds, are voting for HDP. But apart from that, this representation problem, 80% means like 6 million votes. So if you will not be able to represent them in the parliament, that's true. But sometimes it's like behaving, all Kurds are doing the same way, but it's not homogeneous. They're voting for Justice and Development Party. There's some of them are voting for, but this is minority, 20-30%. Rest is voting for Demirtas party, and I think, according to the early polls, it seems that they're going to be in the parliament. That's a good thing. To represent all different ideas in the parliament will be a richness for the democracy of Turkey. So that's good. And when we go back to the economy, I think this election was really focused on the economy too much. In last year, the year before, yes, economy was always a matter, but the global circumstances were helping Turkey a lot, but till now it was going well, and the growth rates in the country, the investments in the country were making Erdogan more popular than he was doing before. But this election, first time in the 16-year history of rulement of Justice and Development Party, Erdogan, the first time the global conjuncture and the country-specific conjuncture were not helping the ruling party. the lira depreciated like 30% since the beginning of the year. Inflation rate became like 12%, and we got used to live in like 8%, 6% range. Now it's 12%, and the food prices are really rising fast. And in the last 3 days of the election, before the election, we were discussing about the prices of an onion and potato, which are the main dishes in our kitchens. So these price increases really affected the people living in the streets. So now, and this turned back for the government to feel the pressure of these price pressures in the votes. So they're very concerned. And one of the main reasons that we're going to these snap elections was that, because the government or the ruling party felt that it's not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to sustain this economic growth process for till 2019 November elections. So they wanted to consolidate their votes as soon as possible to continue to ruling the country. But now what we see that the wage rises are lower than the inflation rates, and the lira depreciated a lot. And Turkish economy is really very much depending on the import goods, both for production and both for consumption. So these two things together, affected the prices a lot. And the other thing is the unemployment rate. We couldn't be able to manage to decrease the unemployment rate less than 10%, like 15 years. And the youth unemployment rate is around 20%. And even you got a job as a university graduate in the country, your level of wage is like around minimum wage. So these things are really started to get a response from the people to the government. And on the other hand, the economy is really focused on the construction industry. That's now, when they started in 2002, it was like 5% in the GDP, the share of construction industry, and now it's around 17%. And the government debts and the foreign deficit is going, rocketing. So these all risks start to attract people interest more, because they started to feel those economic imbalances in their lives. Before that, it was funded by the global capital moves, but now it stopped. So it started to be more expensive for people to live or to sustain their daily lives.
And one other thing, the interest rate policies, that seems to be a major issue of debate. For example, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan seems to have a very controversial, very different idea of what interest rates should be in central banks policies. What is the issue there? Can you give us some more insight?
Let's come from the global thing.
Okay.
Since 2008 to 2013, the American Central Bank, Federal Reserve, started to distribute the money, the quantitative easing process. And Turkey was one of the countries who benefited from this quantitative easing process a lot. One of the most benefiting countries. So, and during those days, the Turkish lira was really strong, and the country's economic growth performance were high because the funding were coming to country. We financed our infrastructure investments, we financed our new investments, blah blah. But now, after 2013, the reversal of funds from emerging countries to developed countries started. But the Turkey couldn't be able to manage this process because most of the investments were for infrastructure and for construction industry, not for the production or competitiveness or the structural reforms. And after 2017 and towards 2018, this outflow of the funds from Turkey to developed economies started to be more. So we needed to do something to keep the funds in the country. The main tool is the monetary policy. Unity interest raise when the Federal Reserve starts to raise the interest rates. But the Turkish government, somebody claims that it's about the religious approach of Erdogan. Somebody says that it's about sustaining the high economic growth rate in the country, because when the interest rates would be higher, the country will stop or will decelerate its economic growth. So and it means that the people will not be able to find jobs, blah blah. So Erdogan didn't want the interest rates to go further, so he started to increase the pressure over the independent central bank not to raise the interest rates. And this pressure started to be higher while we were going through the elections. So he wanted to keep the growth rate fast for the people to be able to find jobs, blah, blah. But this led the foreign funds, the international investors, to leave the country to get more premiums from United States rate increases, rate hikes. And then as a country who has high foreign deficits, high current account deficits, high imports. So you need to find some dollars, you need to find some euros, but the dollars and euros are leaving your country. So what's going to happen? It's the depreciation of the Turkish lira. And this controversial approach by Erdogan led the country to feel itself, to lose it, to lose the value of its currency, like 60-80% in a year. And in literature, it's a crisis. So people started to ask, and that's a very interesting culture of Turkish people. When it's about economy, they follow the currency rates. If Turkish lira will depreciate so fast, so quick, then they started to feel that we need to get some dollars in our houses to sustain our lives because the crisis is coming. That's what happened in the last 3-4 months. The dollarization in the country, plus the high demand of international investors to get some dollars to go out. It really hurt the Turkish lira, and in return, it's inflation, it's rising prices, and also the private sector has high debts, international debts, foreign debts. So think about a company having some debts in terms of dollars and euros, but doing business in Turkish liras in Turkey. So when the Turkish lira will depreciate, their balance sheets really hurt a lot. So now even Erdogan will win or someone else will win. We are in the middle of big challenges in the economy, and people are now going to the election with this perception. Yeah.
And what's the next issue in mind? Because in previous years, security was a major issue. That was the main campaign slogan for Erdogan when we were talking about national security. We need to do cross-border operations in Syria. They've been carrying out these operations. But now it seems that's less of an issue right now for people.
When you look to the polls, you can see that 2 years ago, when we are getting the public opinions, at least 40-50% of the people were claiming that the main problem of Turkey was about terrorism or security issues. Now in the polls, we're seeing that the first issue is about the rising prices and economic imbalances. The second one is again security, but the third one is unemployment. So when you bring them together, more than 60% of the people, regular people living in the streets, are claiming that it's all about economy now. They forgot about the security issues, the Syrian issue, but the priority of economic problems became the main priority, let's say this way. So, to be honest, this election is really about this process, and people are considering their options, what the opposition can promise to them after the elections to take the economy again in a stabilized manner. But to be honest, as an economist, I can say that it's not going to be very easy. Because the global conjuncture, as I said, it's all about keeping international investors within the country for a country like Turkey, because we don't have enough savings to finance our investments or to sustain our debtful economy. So the companies will be in trouble because of those rising US dollar value in Turkey. So we will be facing off important change in the private industry to sustain their businesses after the elections, because everybody was waiting for the elections to be over. But after the elections, we're going to go to our regular normal life, and then we will face with the challenges that we have. And the first thing we're going to face that rising price levels and the private sector risks with the depreciated Turkish lira.
And it's also just important to note that we're in a state of emergency still, although the Turkish president himself also vowed to lift the state of emergency once this election is over. So all of them now believe that it's time to do that. So basically, right now we have about an hour and a half to go with the voting process to continue. The major issue on people's mind is the economy as they're going to vote, as they cast the vote. They're voting for the next president of Turkey. They're voting for parliamentary elections as well. So we're going to see whether or not there's going to be a runoff election on July 8th for the presidential election or not. Thank you so much for all of your insight and for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
This was Michal Bardavid with Oguz Demir today. Thank you for joining us.